Order. The meeting will be conducted electronically and will be broadcast on CTN cable channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at a2gov.org/watch-CTN. Aaron, will you go through the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Berkowitz.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Colvin Garcia. I don't think I see her. Okay. Councilmember Cornell will be absent. Chair Curtis.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Dale.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Vice Chair Graham. Oh, you're muted, but I can see that you're here. Commissioner Hans. Commissioner Kothari.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Levin.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Councilmember Malik.
Here, calling from Ann Arbor's 2nd Ward.
Thank you. Commissioner Mazlumian. Not here yet. Commissioner Mitchell.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Nedrich.
Here in Scioto Township.
Thank you. Commissioner Overpeck.
Here in Ann Arbor.
And Commissioner Smith.
Here in Ann Arbor.
And I'm
Thank
here.
you.
We're Zooming and not teaming. So here I am back to Zoom. Thank you.
Sure, that's a quorum. And then real quick, hi, Chris. Thanks for joining. I see a couple Eagle folks also on the line. Are they going to be speaking as well?
Good evening. Yes.
Okay.
I don't think they're necessarily going to be speaking. Well, if you want to promote Josh to a panelist,
Okay.
that way, just in case that he needs to jump in,
Sure.
I doubt that, but yeah, he's the person that may interject.
Cool. Done. Thank you.
Of course. No, thank you. Would it be all right with you if I gave my screen share a test run right now to make sure everything looks good?
Yeah, hold that. We're just going to do a couple housekeeping things. Is that
No
okay?
problem.
And then we'll jump right back. Okay.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to make changes to the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Moved.
Seconded by Chris Graham. Okay. Vote for approve the agenda. Everybody.
Hey,
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's good. Does anybody want to make changes to last month's meeting minutes? Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes? First by Commissioner Dale, second by Rita Mitchell. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Looks unanimous. Okay. Next, we have public comment. This is an opportunity for people to speak 3 minutes. We don't respond in the moment to speakers. We do appreciate you taking the time to call. Please call 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 988-7619-2402. To raise your hand, press 9. To unmute, press *6. City staff will select callers who've raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Aaron, do we have people calling in?
Yes, we have caller 134. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Curtis. Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. I hope everyone had a good holiday. I look forward to Mr. Svoboda's update on the Gelman plume. My thanks to him for presenting tonight. I haven't followed this issue closely, but I gather that one area of concern is the recent spread of the plume to the portion of Scioto Township that's north of M14. As far as I know, wells there have not reached the action level of 7.2 parts per billion or the 3 parts per billion that would trigger additional action from Gelman, which is actually now Danaher Corporation, of course. So yeah, it's a new area of contamination with the potential to require the city to extend municipal water there with all the costs associated with that, and the disruption to the families there. I know that the consent judgment between Gelman and the state isn't designed to get rid of the plume, clean it up completely, but it clearly isn't even working to contain the spread. Despite the EPA's willingness to list the site for Superfund status, cleanup a few years ago, that hasn't happened. Not clear when it will. I guess my main question for Mr. Svoboda would be whether the state is content with the current situation, and if not, what it might do about it. I realize that there are legal constraints imposed by the consent judgment, but any insight into future plans would be helpful for the many people here who are concerned for good reason. So again, thanks for showing up. I'll be listening with rapt attention. On another subject, Commissioner Overpeck was quoted today by the Associated Press, which reported that U.S. greenhouse gas emissions rose 2.4% last year, after several years of declines. For those who missed it, Commissioner Peck said this: unfortunately, the 2025 U.S. emissions increase is likely a harbinger of what's to come as the U.S. federal leadership continues to make what amounts to a huge, unforced economic error by favoring legacy fossil fuels when the rest of the world is going all in on mobility and power generation using low carbon technology, primarily based on renewables and batteries. End quote. Yeah, completely agree. But I would just point out that the federal government is not the only problem. I don't think we can be complacent here, because with data centers proliferating, with the apparent complicity of state government, which has done all it can to accommodate them, we've got a problem.
10 seconds left.
Our local monopoly utility has openly stated it plans to increase generation, including natural gas combined cycle.
Okay, please wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, caller ending with number 411. Go ahead.
Commissioners, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is James Demore, and I am a member at large of the executive board of CARD, which is a nice acronym, which is for the Coalition for Action of Remediation of Dioxane. Roger Rail, our chair, is the founder of the organization, particularly when the plume affected his property in the 1990s. The plume, even already at the time it elapsed, when it was first discovered by one of our more active members currently, Dan Bicknell, who was then a grad student who discovered Gelman depositing dioxane in the First Sister Lake within the city. Despite these great revelations, and despite all the hullabaloo regarding the plume itself, Gelman/Danaher, and I believe it's owned by another entity now, has never formally acknowledged a responsibility of the plume. Consequently, the state of Michigan went to court with Gelman and its successors, so that we now on a consent decree. And it was a compromise in terms of monitoring wells and cleanup through, I can maintain, not best practices, but this is what has been settled by the courts. It again relies on the dilution and dispersion method as referred by Mr. Garber previously. However, it's not due to cleanup thanks to the repeal of the Polluters Pay Law in the 1990s. Legislation's pending in the legislature to bring back Polluters Pay, but unfortunately it still sits in committee and we're unsure of action this next session of the legislature. So the state of Michigan, it has the tools it is in front of you to working with a consent decree. And as referenced, there is now still a detection of dioxin with 1,000 to 500 feet of Barton Pond, which provides 85% of the city's drinking water, as well as we'll talk about Slauson School and the plume going through the Allens Creek drain. There are concerns regarding vapor intrusion. I think that I would ask that the standing to the commission, I know it's developed this work plan, to continue to look at Gilman as a priority in terms of action, make adjustments to work plan when necessary. I appreciate the involvement of city staff with this matter. Federal intervention has been requested, first approved by the Sierra Club, South Township, and Arbor Township, and later the city and the county. It is pending for investigation. We are awaiting information when determination will be made. With the change in administration and budget issues, we're not sure what's happening, although I don't think this matter is dormant by any means. But it
10
is
seconds.
certainly, I will wrap up. I do hope you consider it a priority and do not hesitate to use CARD as a resource. Our website can be found on the county website organization. And thank you, and I look forward for Dr. Svoboda's presentation.
Thank you. No further callers.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
So Dr. Svoboda, now it's yours.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to go ahead here, share my presentation. Let's make sure. Okay, and hopefully, if you have questions during this, I think I'll be able to see your hands go up. So if you do have a question, I'll try to keep my eyes out for that. I know there were some questions that came through in an email a few days ago. Those were the ones that had been provided to Aaron. And I've tried to design this presentation and, put some points in here that will hopefully answer those questions as we move through. And then for those that the presentation doesn't necessarily address, I've got a little time at the end where I've got a section for that. Let's see. Okay, so the items that I was sort of asked by Aaron to cover during this meeting, the Slauson School seems to be a pretty hot topic. So I'll give you guys some updates on what we've found there and, sort of what that means and put that in the broader context. We're also going to talk about the Huron River and Barton Pond. Then we'll move on to the residential wells in Scioto Township. I have a little bit in there about a municipal water connection contingency plan. As one of the callers indicated, that connection to municipal water may have implications for the city's annexation of those properties. And then I can't say much about the EPA, but I do have at least a short statement I'd like to provide to you with some information about what's been going on with the Environmental Protection Agency and our communications with them. And then that other questions is those questions that didn't really fit in anywhere neatly. Excuse me. So I'm going to begin with the Slauson School. As some of you may know, there was a geothermal project that was planned for all of the Ann Arbor public schools. However, most of those schools do not fall within the area of the plume, or even, the plume is shallow here, I guess is what I'm driving at. We do know that, and being aware of that, in a surface water sampling, we've sampled drains very nearby to the school, so we were very interested in knowing, what kind of dioxane concentrations existed in the groundwater here. So when the health department asked for some test borings to find if there was confinement to prevent cross-contamination of the aquifers, we sort of jumped at the opportunity to get some groundwater monitoring here in the area. Through that, we were able to place 2 new monitoring wells. You can see those here. These are the red circles. There's TMW1, which will be renamed MW153, and then TMW2 S and D, the shallow and the deep there. So we put a nested well cluster at that southern location. You can see there's a difference in the dioxane concentrations between the shallow and the deep, but they are basically within that same aquifer. So one of the, I guess the sort of rationale for why Jenny from the health department, asked for this characterization in the first place is because we wanted to prevent the cross-contamination of aquifers, right? The apertures that these geothermal borings would make during their installation could serve as a conduit for the transmission of dioxane between the upper and the lower aquifer. So the plan was basically to get this characterization and then figure out how to mitigate that. My understanding is that at this point, the schools are sort of pausing this geothermal project. And that it's sort of related to the dioxane there. It sounds like it's sort of a time constraint on their behalf. It caused some uncertainty on the planning for that. We've committed to, once we know more information in the area, to share it with them and hopefully get those plans for that geothermal project back on track. So there were a few questions about these geothermal wells. So even though it's paused for now, I do still want to take a moment to address some of those. So one of them was, whether the institutional controls protect from exposure during the geothermal installation. There's no human exposure route that we think is present during the installation of them. Like I said, our main concern was with the cross-contamination between what we thought and now know is a contaminated aquifer near the surface and what may be a clean aquifer at greater depth. However, the shallow groundwater doesn't necessarily present an exposure risk during the installation. There was another question about what methods are used to manage the geothermal wells at Slauson School to make sure they don't become contaminated. That they are closed systems. So once they are grouted and in place, there should be no way that, dioxane could enter into them or even through, the boring. It was mainly during the installation. We didn't want to create any preferential pathways, which is why the health department recommended double casing these wells. And then one of the other questions that came in about that was, what is the level of risk of increasing the rate of flow of the plume with the number of wells placed at Slauson School? And I don't think there's any, risk of, changing the plume dynamics just from those borings. The plume is going to migrate, based on the hydraulic conductivity of the sands, gravels, basically the geologic units in the subsurface. So my understanding is that, it wouldn't change how rapidly the plume is migrating. Yeah, I think that's kind of the idea. Now, I also read Dr. Locke-Carusso's message, and one of the things she asked was that we sort of put this in a broader perspective. So I'd like to go to our, we have a Gelman Sciences web app. This is a GIS product that Eagle has created. Any of you can go to this tool at any time. I can certainly, provide a link to Aaron, drop one in the chat in a few moments. But, to put that into perspective, so here is Slauson School. Hang on, I'm going to turn off prohibition zone so we can see it a little clearer. You can kind of see that protuberance hanging out there. That is part of Slauson School. And so
Hey, Chris, you know the web app.
Oh, it's not sharing that. Okay,
No.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much for correcting me on that one, Josh. Appreciate that. I'm going to share a new screen if that's okay. Okay, here we go. And then we'll go back to the presentation in a moment. So here is Slauson School. Now this is based on 2024 data. So, our characterization of the plume is shown extending into this area. However, that's kind of an artifact of the model. It just sort of extends concentrations out 500 feet. However, when we update this with 2025 data, it will show the plume, has expanded over here to the area of Slauson School. Now, we've sort of known that the plume was interacting with the Allen Creek for some time. We do surface water sampling annually in the drain, and we've seen dioxane in there every year since I've been here, since 2021. So we've kind of known that it's there, and our hypothesis was it was entering, close to where we were sampling it, and that seems to have been borne out. Now, another piece of context that might be important is, what's up gradient of that. So up gradient basically means, what water is at a higher elevation groundwater wise and is going to be moving down. Can we predict from the monitoring wells at different locations what might be there in the future? One of those predictive wells that we could look at is monitoring well 82. It's actually the deep boring, I believe, that gives us the most information, but let me apologize here. I apologize. It is actually the shallow, it looks like. So we have sort of seen concentrations anywhere from what is currently there, about 180 parts per billion, to up to 360 parts per billion. However, as it migrates, it's also being diluted. So it's not necessarily certain that, when we see 180 parts per billion at this up gradient well, that we expect to see those concentrations down gradient in the future. But, just to give you a sense of what may be coming, that's one of the wells that's up gradient of that location. So that's a good one to look at to predict, what's coming. Now, there's been some discussion about wet basements in this area of Ann Arbor. It is true that the groundwater gets much closer to the surface here in this area, like West Park at the Slauson School. In the Slauson School yard, groundwater is at about 3 to 5 feet depth. So there's concern that groundwater is entering into basements. And the CARD group and some of the scientists that are involved have put out a number that they say could be used as a screening level. That's 150 parts per billion. So we unfortunately cannot enforce that number, but we are aware of that number and sensitive to it. But that said, we don't have any evidence right now that groundwater is even entering into any of these homes in the area. So, we don't necessarily think that risk is even being realized right now. And certainly, what we've detected in the groundwater at Slauson School with a maximum of 35 parts per billion, it's still below that level. I'd also like to zoom out a little bit and talk about the prohibition zone. There's some discussion about, what is allowed in the consent judgment and what, constitutes migration or spread of the plume. The plume is, as it stands under the consent judgment, allowed to migrate within the prohibition zone. The problem is when it leaves the prohibition zone at higher than 7 parts per billion. And we don't have, any evidence that that's happening. So, at this point, we're keeping an eye on things. But yeah, we can't really do much to stop the migration. So it's envisioned that is how it will leave the prohibition zone at this point, for better or for worse. So I'm going to go back now to the presentation. We're going to move on to a slightly different topic. I apologize. Here we go. So that's the story at the Slauson School right now. Shallow groundwater does have dioxane in it. It doesn't, exceed any action levels or cause any risk of exposure or harm at this time. Jonathan, I saw you had a hand. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a couple questions about this before we leave the school. One is when it rains really hard, it's raining harder and harder with climate change. We have like a huge increase in the amount of precipitation that's falling in the highest 1% of our rainstorms, most intense. Doesn't the surface water, you're only 3 to 5 feet below the groundwater, doesn't everything saturate in the Vados down to that? When you get these big storms, in other words, could dioxane get to the surface via that route? So kids are out there playing on that beautiful field.
Right.
Everything's really, really soggy when it rains, right? We know that.
Yeah.
And just below that is dioxane.
That's right. I think typically when you have rainfall on a surface and like let's say it inundates and floods per se, most of that is going to be, there's going to be a downward motion, right? As sort of groundwater moves out of the way and that water infiltrates back into the ground. So I think if anything, these heavy rain events as they infiltrate, they're going to serve to dilute and move, away that dioxane rather than allowing it to come up to the surface.
But you're testing at the surface. Someone's testing at the surface to make sure you're right. I mean, we have kids there.
I don't necessarily know. We've done some seat testing. I don't think that there's any real likelihood that, the water is going to come up at that level and expose anybody. Josh, I see you've got your hand up. So,
Well, it's not just the fact that it may be saturated, there may be standing water, whether or not it has dioxane in it from the groundwater rising up or it's being diluted. It's not at any concentration that's an exposure concern.
Sure.
Not now, right?
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that we're monitoring. I mean,
Yeah, that's why these new wells were put in, because we wanted to make sure we had a permanent.
And the other thing is
measure, but a permanent way to continue to monitor this.
great. The other thing is, even if you double case a well, I'm sure there are plenty of cases where it leaks. So I hope people are going to be testing the geothermal also. I mean, I wouldn't be super concerned about this if it just wasn't like, these are kids. If we're going to protect anyone, we've got to protect the kids. And so maybe it's CARD who has to do that. I hope someone does it.
I apologize. I don't want to miss. Was there? I'm not sure if there was what the question was specifically.
Is anyone monitoring planning to monitor the geothermal rather than just assuming it's safe?
I'm not aware of that. Aside from collaborating with the county on getting these wells installed and making sure that we did prevent that cross contamination, I don't think we've had that discussion. My understanding is that they want to grout these wells. They want them to be sealed. They don't want them to exchange with the outside. So I can't make that assurance, but I think that's in everybody's interest.
Yeah. So I'll just put it on the table right now that Ann Arbor, if no one else is doing it, Ann Arbor really should be monitoring more at this school, not less.
Agreed.
Thanks.
Mr. Svoboda?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have my hand up. So
yeah, I see you. I was
waiting for somebody to recognize me. I had a question about something you stated earlier about the current definition of the prohibition zone. You said something about how if some dioxide measurement gets above 7 parts per billion, it triggers something, but it's not clear to me exactly what that is. In terms of Eagle's judgment or EPA's.
Well, in our legal agreement, the consent judgment, we have this trigger process that, there are monitoring wells that are at the boundary of the prohibition zone. If certain levels are reached in some of those wells, it depends on what the categorization of the well is. But if that level is reached in any of those monitoring wells, it triggers things such as increased, monitoring, the enactment of parts of at least our municipal water connection contingency plan. And I've got more on that a little bit later, but yeah, there is a process, basically the trigger process. If we detect it leaving the prohibition zone at concentrations that are above those action levels, it triggers a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm sorry I don't have like there's like a flow chart and it's pretty complicated. But increased monitoring is the sort of the first step.
Okay, no, I'm sure there is, but just as one follow-up, in past cases, what's the time delay between that kind of acknowledgement and meaningful remedial action?
I'm not really sure that we've seen anything like this. There were parts of Ann Arbor, or I guess they might have been Scioto Township previously, that were annexed in the past. But I wasn't present for those, and I can't say if this, if it does happen, if we need to add other homes to municipal water, exactly how it'll go. But we do have the plan in place, so at least some of that information is known. And that includes, like what homes are part of that. There's information about that trigger process in that plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Of course, Rita.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on something that Professor Overpeck mentioned, and that was testing during or soon after a rain event at the surface, and whether that could be included in some of the monitoring, because it seems like that would be worthwhile and relatively, from someone who doesn't do it, relatively easy.
Sure, certainly. Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of, if there's anybody that keeps an eye on flooding at the school, but if one of you drives by and sees water on the ground, maybe we could get out there. We monitor the surface water, and that's sort of my next slide. So we have been monitoring out there for years.
Hey, Chris, can I speak to that really quick though?
Josh, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, we don't want to make light of the situation, but we don't want to be alarming either. So when you're looking at setting up a sampling program, whether it be groundwater, surface water, standing water, there has to be an exposure concern and an exposure route, a complete pathway to human exposure. And standing water would create more of a direct contact concern versus a consumption concern. It's not the tap. The kids aren't drinking the water, off of the ground every day, 2 liters a day. It would be a contact concern, and these concentrations don't reach any concentration that would be an exposure concern for that pathway. So we don't just look at the fact that contamination exists. It's what is the exposure pathway to a human receptor, and what concentration does it become a concern. So we have to look at all those factors. And we don't really see a complete pathway at this point if there is standing water with some, level of, single digit part per billion of dioxane in a puddle or in a seep. Now, if it was orders of magnitude higher, it might become a concern for a direct contact, but that number is, I don't have it right in front of me, is way different than a drinking water exposure. Just lots to consider.
Thanks, Josh. That's great. So I've been doing a lot of risk assessment these days in my professional work. And I actually was wondering if you guys had looked at incidental ingestion of water. I know in West Park, there's a pond there that has pretty high levels, well, compared to what we're seeing up on this slide, but that might be something to look at, that you could kind of screen out incidental consumption of water from kids splashing or whatever through doing that sort of evaluation quantitatively. and then be able to share that with the group. That would be really, really, really interesting and useful, since we know the drinking water numbers are so much lower than the dermal and the vapor routes of exposure.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have a enforceable criteria for that, contact with groundwater at this time, but there is a way we could develop a screening level that would give us some indication if there's even a potential exposure risk. And I don't know what, I'm not the toxicologist that does that. Obviously, you know that. But there would be, we could do a preliminary evaluation of whether these would ever become a concern for incidental contact, which would include some portion of ingestion, just like spill contact includes some, you're going to eat some of the dirt when you come in contact. So
yeah, I mean,
it wouldn't be enforceable, but it would be a way to screen.
Yeah, yeah. And it would show, the utmost precautionary, approach, right? So,
right.
Imagine a kid splashing in a puddle and it's spraying in his friend's face, and,
yeah.
What did that look like? And then what if someone gets pushed in the pond and they have to swim and they accidentally drink some? What would that number look like? That would, just be a helpful way for the community to sort of digest those risk pathways.
Sure.
Hard pun. And kids never eat dirt.
No.
But that's one of the assumptions in our exposure pathway, that they aren't eating dirt every day.
Chris, go ahead.
3 questions. Are any of the wells outside the prohibition zone in Scioto Township testing above 7 parts per million?
Sure. And I've also got some slides on that, so I'll be covering that shortly, but no is the answer to that.
Okay. Does the fact that the plume is moving that way cause any further actions in terms of trying to mediate that flow so far?
I'm not certain I would characterize the plume as moving that way. There is dioxane in Scioto Township, but the groundwater flow that's taking most of the dioxane is either going, off the site to the east towards the Huron River, or there's a very minor component that goes to the west. But like I said, and we define migration of the plume as movement above 7.2 parts per billion. And that has not occurred at those Scioto Township wells.
And you put your
and one thing we have to understand about those too is, we'd be looking for increasing trends to show that it's currently migrating. A lot of these detections popped up as we started to lower the detection level. So it's really hard for us to say, well, that just migrated there. It might have been there for a decade or more, or 2 decades. It was below what we could see. So as we refined our laboratory analytical, we are now seeing it, but we don't have any good way to predict when it got there. So is it currently migrating, or is it already migrated? That's not something we can tell right now, but we're actively monitoring to make sure that, okay, it is there. It's not at levels that are unacceptable exposure under state law, but we're continuing to monitor to make sure it doesn't reach that. And like Chris said, there are contingencies well up gradient of those wells to put in place well before we would see it at a 7.2 exposure concern in a private well. That's how the consent decree is built. Not saying there couldn't be a surprise that happens, but that's the safeguards that are in place.
I guess I have 2 more questions. Can you put the map that shows the prohibition zone back up again?
I can. Give me one moment here.
Thank you.
Gladly. All right. Here we are. And just for reference, so the prohibition zone is this maroon colored boundary here.
Right.
The plume is this purple mass that's sort of moving towards the east. And then, the area that we just looked at in the presentation that showed those detections, those wells in Scioto Township are up in this area.
Got it. So within all that colored mass, are there any locations where any basement or any well much less the surface, is above 7 parts per million?
All right, I'm sorry.
Is there any
Could you repeat that?
well or any location in those purple areas that are above 7 parts per million?
7 parts per billion. Yeah, there are plenty. So this dark line, this represents the 7.2 boundary. So anything that's this sort of purple color or darker is going to be greater than that 7.2 part per billion. So there are areas outside of the prohibition zone, in sort of the migration area that are over that 7 parts per billion. But groundwater use is prohibited in that area. So nobody should be exposed to that groundwater.
So it's deep enough not to be any concern unless you have a well down there, not basements or
Yes, sir.
Allen Creek waterway or.
That's right. Well, so, geologically speaking, in this part of the plume, you guys are able to see my mouse in the area that I'm circling, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is I'm using the term deeper unit. It's pretty far underground. The groundwater surface comes much closer to the surface, like the ground surface, down here in West Park. So it is basically migrating through this deeper layer, and then it's coming shallower down here. But nobody has wells down there either.
But far deep enough not to be an issue in anybody's basement.
We have not seen it in anybody's basement.
Okay, last question. Would you guys drink from a water well with 7 parts per billion of this stuff?
I mean,
or would you buy bottled water?
I mean, I would certainly take a couple sips. It's not like I'm gonna, say that I wouldn't probably, if it was at the drinking water level, I wouldn't want to be drinking that. And I can understand why people are upset. But
Yeah, personal choices and personal, safety consciousness is a lot different than the regulatory values. We have to stop there. We can't really give opinion on what we think our beliefs are. We can only give opinion as to what the regulatory framework is. So that may be unsatisfying, but that's the
we did pretty good about the standard in Michigan. You agree with that?
It's what's legally defensible and calculated under our rules and state law that the legislature put forth.
Okay, thank you. That one particular spot where all those wells are, it's dark purple, is worrisome, but it's how many feet down typically?
I don't have the exact numbers. I will let you know that, in the darkest purple area, a new extraction well that pulls contaminated groundwater out for treatment has been installed there, and was operational within the last couple of years.
Is there more than that new one? Are there old ones also that have been working?
Oh yeah, yes, sir. There are here. One of the things that our web application can do, well, at least it used to be able to do, I hope I didn't just make a hollow promise, used to be able to filter by well types. It looks like that functionality may be gone. But they're tough to see, but I'll point a few of them out. So any of these gray circles that with little crosshair, those are extraction wells, and there are quite a few extraction wells. There are a few up and down Wagner Road. One of Gelman's objectives is to reduce the amounts that go across Wagner Road. So you'll see there's one here, TW21. There's quite a few of them on the Gelman property. I believe that the new one over here is reflected in those. So yeah, there are lots of extraction wells. Yes, here's TW27, which is that new extraction well that became operational recently.
How much do you think they're helping diminish the movement of the plume?
I'm afraid I can't necessarily speculate on that right now.
even in gross terms, some or
Some,
maybe a bit
certainly.
or not a lot?
There are some restrictions on how much they can get, back to their facility and pump out across Wagner Road. But I think it's better than nothing, certainly. I do think it's helping.
Yeah, I mean, we can say it has decreased known areas where these wells are located. It has decreased some of the highest concentrations,
Good.
by orders of magnitude. So theoretically, what that would do is it's not stopping the migration of the plume westward towards the Huron River, but it's certainly decreasing the magnitude of those concentrations that may have migrated. Without these wells, they would probably be migrating at much higher levels than they are currently.
Thank you.
Anya?
Yeah, thanks. So, so it looks to me it's mostly migrating east. You're saying that the concentration's going north-ish towards the river is also being mitigated by some of these wells. So are we primarily concerned about when people are talking about being worried about getting into the drinking water of Barton Pond? I mean, it looks like from where it's moving that it's more likely happening below Barton Pond, closer to Argo. Am I sort of interpreting this correctly? And then also I'm curious, I have two questions. One is, so it's much closer to the surface at West Park. Is
That's
there,
correct.
what was that?
That is correct.
Yeah. So, so is there any concern with people, coming into contact with the pond there, or is that again sort of the risk of exposure, because hopefully people are not drinking the pond water, is pretty low.
That's
Hopefully,
right.
but people, I don't know. My dog jumped into the water at one point. Like, how much do I need to worry about?
Well,
Everybody
as
can
Josh
try and
mentioned,
drop,
we don't have like a direct contact with groundwater number that's necessarily enforceable. The EPA does have a screening level for dioxane. That's 2,200 parts per billion. Now, West Park Pond, we've seen it. So this is our surface water sampling. So this is the concentrations that we've actually seen in the surface water down there at the West Park Pond. So the max that we ever observed there was 2.2 parts per billion. So several orders of magnitude below that. I hope that answered the question.
It does. And I had one more, if I can keep the floor for a second. Is there any concern about it getting access to the Huron River through Allen Creek? Is that like sort of making those connections to the piped areas or not?
That is the way at this moment that the consent judgment envisions that the dioxane that will be the ultimate fate, is it will intercept the Allen Creek drain and then be discharged to the Huron River, obviously downstream of Barton Pond. Recently, Gelman did start monitoring the outfall of the Allen Creek drain. I actually have that in this slide as well. That location is right about here. Up to 280 parts per billion is permissible under Part 201 at that outfall. And currently, we've seen in the 2 to 5 part per billion range. Gelman has been adamant that it will never reach that 280 part per billion level, but we've asked for certainly more information that supports that as part of our a groundwater surface water investigation. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Once it dumps into the river, concentration goes to a very small number?
It would ostensibly be diluted. That would be the other thing about Part 201 is, even with that discharge of 280, they are entitled to what's called a mixing zone, which is basically where the groundwater that's venting at above that level can mix into the surface water and be diluted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Chris. I had a question about this while we're on this topic because I've
Certainly.
heard that the Gelman's responded to the EPA's request for information, and they're stating that they think these kinds of levels are from basically background levels at 2 parts per billion. They're claiming that there's no evidence that any of these numbers are part of the plume. So I was wondering what Eagle's attitude about that was.
I'm not certain exactly where you're referring to or what.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's basically Gelman filed a statement. Well, now that it's being considered by the EPA, they asked for public comment.
Mhm.
And so Gelman apparently filed a public comment stating that they believe that these levels in those wells are coming from septic tanks or surface water, things like that, and from consumer products, and have nothing to do with the plume itself. So I was wondering if what Eagle's attitude is about that, and how they would really prove to themselves, to their satisfaction, whether these are part of the plume or not.
Sure. Well, they certainly would say that. You know, we don't have a lot of information to really confirm or deny that hypothesis. One thing that you can look for in water samples is like man-made chemicals. I think artificial sweeteners are one of them. There's apparently, and I'm still learning some of this, so I apologize if I don't have the exact specifics.
Oh, we all are.
Yeah. But you can get these tests, right? There is like a specific EPA method for typical things that you would find in septic systems, right? So artificial sweeteners, maybe some pharmaceuticals. So that's one way that we could test whether or not it's Gelman's dioxane. At this point, we're certainly acting as if it's Gelman's dioxane. That certainly makes the most sense. But that said, not all the dioxane in Ann Arbor or Washtenaw County is necessarily attributable to them. But they certainly have not demonstrated that what's in Scioto Township wells is not theirs or is theirs.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rita?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask a question about like the prohibition zone, which is my question is it considered more like a municipality thing as opposed to a water flow thing? Is it specific to Ann Arbor and excluding Scioto Township, even though there may be contamination in Scioto?
Yes, the prohibition zone only covers Ann Arbor and parts of Ann Arbor.
So is it possible that there really could be or should be a prohibition zone that applies to Scioto Township?
So there are some of the properties where, like for example, just to the west of the Gelman property, they have what are called restrictive covenants on them. And a lot of those do restrict groundwater usage. But those are more like, things that would be realized when the land changes hands, for example, but not necessarily like an institutional control, like the prohibition zone. I hope I said that all right.
Yeah, I mean, the ordinance is, for the municipality of Ann Arbor.
Okay.
That's
All right.
That's what they call it, institutional control. It's institutionalized in the ordinance, in the code of ordinances. But in Scioto Township, where there's restrictions, those are private land use restrictions that property owners have agreed to put on. So they're controlled by the property owner and recorded on the deed and run with the land. So they're called proprietary controls versus institutional controls, but they act in the same manner.
That's right.
They're just controlled by different entities, private landowners or municipalities.
All right. Okay. And could you talk a little bit about the trend of the sampling in Scioto?
Yes, I can. So, to say whether there is a trend or not on a series of measurements, we look to a statistical test that's called the Mann-Kendall trend analysis. You need at least 4 samples to run this analysis. So homes that have been sampled less than 4 times, we can't necessarily say there is or is not an increasing, decreasing trend, et cetera. We did perform this analysis on some of these Scioto Township wells. I think of the 40, these numbers are going to be rough, I apologize, but of the 45 wells that we sampled, I believe 3 of them we could say they are increasing. But we don't really have enough information to say that all of them are, most of them are. We can say that 3 of them are, but those are located in, vastly different areas. So it's not like we can point to one specific area where like, we're sure this is increasing here. But we do, as we collect that data, we will be continuing that analysis. Sarah?
Thanks. Thanks, Chris and Josh. Like, it's really great that you guys stepped up to be here. And I just want to express gratitude to you for all that you do.
Thanks.
And I also, I guess, looking at the Rockswork model, which...
Oh, yes.
Did that work right?
Rockworks. You got
it. Just kind of looking at it, it's very... I find it quite patchy, particularly in the Scioto Township region.
That's right.
What are the plans to continue to delineate? Like, I'm assuming we're not confident yet that we have full delineation. Just like looking at some of the, lines on here.
Yeah, certainly. There certainly are data gaps. There are ways that we have to close some of them. For example, we are going to be looking at a down gradient monitoring plan. And so some of those data gaps we're hoping to close down on the undefined edges of the plume. I'm not exactly sure about all the areas that are gaps and if we have a mechanism to fill in some of those gaps. But I think we've got a good delineation on the plume. Like I said, I don't think that, it's perfect per se. There could certainly be improvements. And I think that one of the things that we've demonstrated is that we're working to make some of those improvements. And, if we can't compel Gelman to do that, we're willing to collect some of that information ourselves, like we did with those wells at Slauson. So, if it comes to a point where there's somewhere that we absolutely need data, we'll be exploring other possibilities besides Gelman's compliance, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And when you say mechanism, you mean like a regular mechanism, like you don't have teeth to enforce more wells to get the delineation.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, I remember back when I was with RRD, there was debate about 2 different hydrogeological models. It was the Larry Lemke model and Jim Brody's model. And they both had very different conclusions and very large implications. If Larry's model was right, then there could be parts of the plume that were missing. And then, come to now, we found all these new homes impacted in Scioto Township. And my alarm bells went off. Like, did we miss this in the model? Like, should we have looked more closely at Larry Lemke's model and incorporated it into, our plans for what we were requiring from Gelman? So, I would recommend revisiting that. I like the Rockworks model because it is just taking the data that we have and sort of interpolating it, which is great. And that's what you want to show the public. But I think behind the scenes, there needs to be a lot more digging into that to make sure people are protected.
Well, Sarah, I agree. Certainly at this point, there's significant uncertainty what the future of Gelman is as we kind of wait to hear what the EPA is going to do. But if that's not the case, then I've certainly got plenty of ideas for, exploring things like groundwater models and stuff like that. So if it turns out that the EPA doesn't take the site, then we'll turn our attention to that.
That's great. Yeah, there's so much good science on this site. Like it'll be fun for the super fun to dig their teeth into when they come on board. Mhm.
Indeed. I just wanted to go back really briefly. So there's another Eagle resource in addition to our Gelman webpage. It's called Ride Mapper. And I brought up this picture of Ride Mapper to sort of show, there was some discussion about the groundwater restrictions, right? So you can see here, this blue polygon actually represents the prohibition zone that we looked at. It was red, the red boundary on the other map. As you can see, these brown polygons here, these are restrictive covenants that are filed on Gelman offsite properties. And I haven't looked at all of them, but the polygon existing there means that there is a restrictive covenant. And I would imagine, based on what's happening there, that they would all restrict groundwater use. However, it's, in private landowner wells versus a municipal ordinance. So they're slightly different mechanisms to restrict that use. So, and all this Ride Mapper is also publicly available. And, if you want to go on here yourself, you can actually, click on the polygon and read the restrictive covenant yourself, if you're curious about that. So, just wanted to point out that information is available. And also that, those offsite properties are restricted from groundwater use.
So, Chris, I think we bounced you around a lot with questions. Are there other slides you have to present?
There are.
Let's go back to that.
Sure, quite all right. It's funny, this, reminds me a lot of my dissertation defense, because you prepare a presentation and you get one slide deep, and then all of a sudden your committee's taking a million different directions, and you're like, wait, I made this presentation for you. But these are great questions, and I really appreciate, your interest and your asking them and having us here to provide some of that information. So we kind of talked here. I'm sorry, what was that? I apologize.
Thank you for being up there in Lansing and doing this stuff.
Certainly.
We'd be lost without you.
So one of the other items that I want to point out on this slide before we do move on, because there is concern about Barton Pond, and I understand why there is that concern. I just want to sort of show, this is what the data says. So we have monitored the surface water in a couple points that are close to Barton Pond. One of those is the confluence of the Honey Creek and the Huron River. We've detected dioxane at that boundary, but this is not, above a level that sets off alarm bells. We're continuing to monitor that. We've also detected it down here along Huron River Drive. One of the things that Erin, I think, pointed out in her message, and I'm not sure who all received that, but the drinking water itself is monitored for dioxane, and there have not been detections in there. So, at this point, we don't think that there's considerable dioxane entering Barton Pond. One of the other concerns might be sort of about the future. What will this become? My sense, so another thing I want to point out is that Gelman does operate a treatment system. They have a NPDES permit, that's a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit. So they discharge treated groundwater, but that does still have dioxane in it. They're allowed to discharge up to 7.2 parts per billion as a monthly average. And that's happening right here in the Honey Creek, basically. And that, we can sort of see that as we move through the Honey Creek, right? We see dioxane at other locations along that creek in decreasing concentrations. However, from a mass balance perspective, you know, if they're discharging 7.2 parts per billion here, it can never get above that here without other sources of dioxin. And we don't know any that are big contributors to that loading. So we don't think that there's big problems at Barton Pond. And I think one of the other questions was, what advice does Eagle have for increased demand to drinking water? I just want to say that's not really our wheelhouse. You know, we look at trying to clean up contamination and manage risks. But Eagle does have a drinking water division. So unfortunately, that's a question that I would probably have to punt to them, just because it's not really my area of expertise. So I didn't want you to think that, you know, I could say something, but it probably wouldn't be that effective. So, but they may have already looked into this and made some recommendations as well. Okay, so one of the questions, you know, we've been talking about these residential wells. We've kind of already taken a look at this. We do see dioxane in Scioto Township. You know, this sort of area right here sort of seems to be the center of where it's located. The maximum that we've seen there is, you know, less than 2 parts per billion. So unfortunately, it's not, you know, at a consent judgment action level. It's not at a Part 201 action level. So unfortunately, we have to just continue to monitor it. And I know that's not super satisfying. And, you know, I know it's not great to have dioxane in your drinking water. And we are sensitive to that. But until that threshold gets crossed, you know, those are sort of our regulatory limits. I did want to also point out our 2026 residential well sampling plan. So that this map is somewhat the same area. You'll probably recognize this, you know, pattern. These maroon circles, these are the detections of dioxane. Anything that's grayed out here has already been sampled and was non-detect at a 0.2 part per billion detection limit, which is very close to the EPA method 522 detection limit of 0.12 parts per billion. And then anything in green here has been chosen for sampling in 2026. So anywhere that was not non-detect in Scioto Township and was within 250 feet of a detection is planned for sampling in 2026.
Good.
Ms. Dale, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I'm just curious why those are all east of, at, you know, some point it looks like as it gets closer to Huron, to the Huron, it's getting closer. My brain. It's only to the east side of Wagner, rather than, even though Honey Creek is on the west/north side of Wagner. So I'm curious why that is.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Something that I don't necessarily have like a concrete answer. There has
Different
been
watersheds.
I'm sorry, what was that, Mr. Graham?
Different watersheds.
That's a possibility. There's also so, you know, the glacial geology, you know, the drift that sort of everybody's drinking water wells are set in up here. It was basically the way that I think about it in my brain is it was sort of a river network, right? It was sort of at the edge of a glacier, and there were lots of distributaries running off of this glacier. There were lots of so sand bodies, and so there are geological preferential pathways that contamination could follow. So there has been some discussion of like a buried river valley, or you know, like river sediments that could explain that. Unfortunately, we don't have monitoring wells up in the area. The well logs are from, you know, well drillers that are not necessarily trained geologists. This isn't to say they don't know what they're looking at, but you know, they're not logging those, you know, the lithologies in the subsurface with care. So we can't necessarily, you know, look at those and say, oh, this is absolutely what's going on there. So at this point, it would just sort of be speculation. But that's one of the reasons that's been speculated, is that there's like a buried distributary network that serves as a channel for that. One other thing I do want to point out about the residential well sampling for 2026 is that because of sort of the animal that it's grown into, there's, I think, 220 homeowner wells that we're planning to sample in 2026. And this has always been done by the Washtenaw County Health Department. And they've been excellent, but, they've communicated to me that they are sort of at their limit. So we are hoping to hire a contractor to do this work for a variety of reasons. There's safety concerns, there's the county's manpower concerns. So we do want to get that information, though, and continue to monitor this, which is why we've made that decision to hire somebody to do that work. And then the last thing I have to say regarding residential wells, some of the things that we monitor are part of a municipal water connection contingency plan. And I mentioned this might be of some interest to, the Ann Arbor City Council because, in the past, I think when areas are added to municipal water, they become annexed by the city. So these are the 4 areas that we have in this municipal water connection contingency plan that sort of might be the focus of future activity. I can say, we've seen detections in this area, but nothing serious. Elizabeth Road there are wells there that are sort of bouncing near some of our trigger levels, and we've been monitoring those very closely. And I'm not sure about Calvin Street, but these are the areas where at least the consent judgment does envision.
Go ahead. No, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Does envision that there may be the need to hook these areas up to municipal water in the future. But at this point, none of those trigger levels have been reached. So just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention here. There was a question about, the Eagle EPA communication. I can't say a whole ton because those discussions are still ongoing. What I can share is that we have been in contact with the EPA. Our position is and has been that listing the Gelman site on the Superfund National Priorities list is the community's best chance at, a new and potentially different remedy. So we've, been advocating for that and providing them any technical support that they do ask for. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten any timelines, next steps. There's a part in this question that talks about the existing consent order. We've had those conversations at a surface level, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of clarity from our partners at the EPA. So still hoping to hear good news on that front. There were a couple other questions that didn't really fit in quite anywhere in that, but I did want to give them a moment. There's this question about an illicit discharge into the Allen Creek drain. We've sort of discussed this before in other venues, but according to, the statutes that the Remediation and Redevelopment Division implements, the dioxane is allowed to be in the drain, and it's envisioned to be in the drain and exit through the drain. However, under the Clean Water Act, it's technically an illicit discharge. However, enforcing that would be a business for the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commission and the Eagle Water Resources Division, who has delegated authority for the Clean Water Act. So, from where we stand, the dioxane in the drain is okay until it exceeds 280 at that outfall. But that said, we have communicated with the Water Resources Division. So, I'm not sure what their plan is. And then I think we kind of already talked about this, right? What advice does Eagle have for the city for increased demand for drinking water? That's not really our wheelhouse. My apologies that I can't give you something more substantial there. But so that's another Eagle division, the Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division, that may be the people to ask that question. So, and then I don't know if there are any questions that have come up during the course of this conversation. I think we've had a pretty good talk. So really hope that most of the questions have been answered thus far. Rita, I see you've come back up.
I did, thanks. I just wanted to ask about the testing in the private wells and
Oh, yes.
if you have concerns about consistency, because each well
Yes.
is unique, right? And
That's right.
so if you could just talk about it from a science perspective and
That's right.
how what kind of implications you might think of.
Yeah, we don't really think that, the depth of the wells is really a factor in, I guess I shouldn't say that. We have noticed that there is somewhat of a depth dependence on where we find the dioxane, but as far as sampling, the well's depth doesn't make that much of a difference. We have a standard operating procedure that we've developed with the Washtenaw County Health Department. When we sample any well, we find an outside spigot that we think is untreated or have confirmed is untreated, meaning it's not like run through reverse osmosis. Then the policy is to purge that well for 5 minutes to basically clear out the line and be at least fairly certain that we're getting, a representative sample of the water, and then collect as is indicated, in the lab methodology for dioxane. So it's that sort of standardization that really, is where we know that we're getting the right numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I apologize that I had that question and I apologize that I didn't address it. So thank you for bringing it back up. Sarah.
Yeah, I just have one last question that popped into my head. So for residential wells where they're below the action limit of 7.2, but they're still getting, has Gelman been asked to provide bottled water on a voluntary basis?
You're talking about like the ones in Scioto Township that are at like 1. We have not made that request. I'll just leave it at that. No, we have not made that request. We do have the trigger. So we have the trigger levels in the consent judgment, and they will provide bottled water if somebody's well does go over 3 parts per billion, which is actually, more protective than the state's, criteria of 7.2.
Very good.
So, yes. So, and certainly, if we ever detected dioxane in a well over 3, we would be, communicating with Gelman immediately and asking them to voluntarily, even if it wasn't, something that they thought was theirs, we would be asking them to still provide that water. But we have not crossed that action level yet. So, which I think is a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, Noah.
Yes, thanks for the presentation, first of all. Yeah, I was just wondering if it does become part of Superfund, if the EPA takes over, or even if there was, say, the city of Ann Arbor wanted to go ahead and be more aggressive with the cleanup. Is it just a matter of more aggressive pumping and treating, or is there like more than that that can be done to remove like the really contaminated area around the site where it originated? Or
that is an excellent question. There are other options. That's one of the reasons that we hope for that Superfund listing is, the Superfund listing is a process. So they would if it were to be listed, they would do an investigation and then a feasibility study on what other remedies could be employed and what their effectiveness would be. And that's sort of one of the reasons we think that listing it is a good thing, so that we can kind of go through that process. I don't know if more pumping and treating would necessarily be exactly what I would prescribe, at least not there. And by not there, I mean not in the source area necessarily. But we don't have a lot of latitude to really change the sort of status quo of the site.
Gotcha.
I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thanks.
Great, thank you. John?
Hi there. Thank you so much for this presentation and taking the time to share all of this information with us.
Yes.
My question is kind of, I guess, general in the sense, is there any other comparable cases that Eagle monitors similar to this, whether it be dioxane specifically or, another pollutant, or if you're aware of any other, even outside of Michigan?
Certainly, that's a great question. The Gelman site is actually a fairly unique site because it is a large release of just 1,4-dioxane. Most of the time, 1,4-dioxane is a co-contaminant with other solvent releases. There are other, 1,4-dioxane plumes outside of Michigan and within Michigan, but I'm not so sure they're easily comparable. I don't think there's anything that really comes close to the magnitude. There is a landfill out in West Michigan, but I don't know a whole ton about that. Uh-oh. Am I still with you guys?
Yes,
Yep.
you are.
We still hear
Okay.
you.
Okay, great. My state VPN just kicked off because I apparently signed into work 12 hours ago this morning. So I wanted to make sure it didn't like completely remove me from the call. Everything froze. So yeah, the Gelman site is a bit of a snowflake in the sense that it is, the only, at least to my knowledge, the only like pure dioxane solvent site of its size. So
Great.
I mean,
thanks.
the only thing
That's
else
helpful
you could
context.
compare it to would be the PFAS,
that's
contamination, which is
mhm.
widespread in, Kent County, where half of Kent
Mhm.
County contaminated from Wolverine operations, or the northern half of it. And there's really no good cleanup mechanism. That one is also more of a, stop it from leaching from the source and contain it, make sure nobody's drinking it. We hooked up 1,000 people to municipal water to get them off of, contaminated drinking water, because cleaning up their aquifer would take longer than they would be alive, frankly. So it's really that abatement of risk that is the priority. And, that's what happened here also. And the objective here is to contain it so you don't have to abate any more risks. But that's what happens with PFAS a lot, unless it's discharging to a surface water, then you try to cut it off. There's a large TCE plume up in Mansalona, Michigan, that has traveled, many, many miles, very deep, almost impossible to treat. And again, continue to abate the risk by providing municipal water is the best option than trying to, pump it all out of the groundwater for the next 300 years. So, I mean, there are similarities to other types of contaminants. And I would say the remedy here isn't unique to just this plume. The situation might be unique, but the tactic isn't a unique tactic that's being taken.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions?
You.
All right. Well, I really appreciate, you asking me to be here and, allowing us to sort of give you this update. Very spirited discussion. I can certainly, understand why people are concerned. So, but at this point, I think my closing thought I'd like to share is that, we've worked hard to mitigate these exposures. We don't think there's any unacceptable exposures around Gelman. And, I think we're working to make sure that, if new things emerge, we're also making sure there's no unacceptable exposures there as well. In a perfect world, we'd love to clean up every drop of dioxane. But, we're sort of living in reality where that's not the case. So.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was a very informative presentation. Very helpful.
Very good. All right. Is there anything else you'd like from us, or can we take our leave now for you to finish the rest of your business here?
I think you guys can go. Sounds like you've been working for 12 hours now.
I did take breaks, so don't not working too hard over here.
Good, who allowed that?
All right.
Hey,
Well,
thank you, everybody. Appreciate the audience.
indeed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Till the next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
So our next item on the agenda is work group updates. Is there anything from building decarbonization?
I should have a report to y'all in a week or two, very soon.
Okay, what about returnable containers?
Not met since our last full commission meeting. We'll be meeting in early February, so we'll have some updates next month.
Okay, sidewalk gap filling?
We met yesterday, you included, and we are continuing work on some communications, some documentation that will kind of meld the interests of sidewalk gap filling and supporting trees, trying to get the and in the system of all of this. I want to thank Erin for all of her help. So I hope that we'll have more info for next time.
Okay, thanks. Water quality? Chloride? Is that anybody? Was there a meeting?
Sure. Do you,
Erin, go.
Sarah, do you want to? Yeah. Okay, I'll go. Yes. The chloride work group met last week, and we continue to discuss some of the source identification in 3 tributaries in Ann Arbor where we know we have high chlorides. And we discussed some approaches that some other regions are doing around chloride control. So Midwestern states that use a lot of de-icing and anti-icing materials. And Steve put together a little overview on that, on some permitting programs and some more like incentive-based programs for different companies to go through salt-wise trainings. So we have, I'm working with some folks in the GIS team internally to develop a GIS-based tool where we can do a little deeper dive into the source identification piece. So we'll be able to look at some of the land use and kind of look at where like the big parking lots and roads are that we know probably are contributing to high chlorides, as well as the steepness of the watershed. And I think there was one other factor we were looking at that's escaping me now, but that will hopefully be complete in the next couple of weeks. Sarah, Steve, did I leave anything out there?
Nope, sounds good.
Okay. Next was city council updates. We have anything from Councilmember Malik?
I took a peek ahead at what Erin is going to present in the staff update, and anything I was going to mention for city council is also in there, so I will defer to Erin.
Perfect. Great job, Erin. Do you want to show the staff updates?
Sure. Okay. This one's kind of lengthy, which is good. So from the Office of OSI, and Joe, jump in if I misspeak about anything or if you want to add anything. So this first one, so 820 Home Energy Advisor hits the milestone, helping over 500 Ann Arbor households, which is a great milestone. Over 500 Ann Arbor homes have now received customized plans for advancing sustainability, energy efficiency, and health through through the HEA program. So that was launched back in 2004, and that continues to be a program that folks can participate in. City of Ann Arbor's green rental housing ordinance went into effect last week. So that ordinance requires every rental unit in Ann Arbor to meet a minimum energy efficiency level at the time of its rental inspection. And I know we talked about that one, that was passed last June. So the ordinance will help ensure that all rental units in Ann Arbor meet a minimum baseline of health, comfort, and efficiency as we work to achieve 820 goals. I don't know, Joe, do you have any follow-up on how that has been going?
Been a whirlwind. Got a lot going on, a lot of people asking questions, a lot of people who are working towards it and getting into compliance. So it's been a learning experience, but so far so good. A week in with plenty more to go.
All right, thank you. This next one is expression of interest, public electric vehicle charging. So we were awarded the charging and fueling infrastructure grant with the goal of building a public electric vehicle charging station network that's affordable, safe, reliable, and widely accessible. So the city is working with a variety of stakeholders on that. And as of December 2025, the city is preparing a final call out to invite any possible remaining site hosts to participate in the CFI grant program through the intake form. So spread the word on that. A2 ambassador applications are open. I'm sure you all are very familiar with that. Let me see when the deadline is. See an obvious deadline, but folks can go to that link and check out when applications need to be in for 820 ambassador. You can submit nominations for a climate action hero. So every month, 820 Climate Action Heroes will recognize a community member who inspires others to make positive change and help the community achieve 820 goals. So those will be recognized in the charging station, which hopefully all of you get, which is OSI's newsletter. So you can nominate folks at this link. The Sustainable Food Business Coalition 2025 Food and Hospitality Socials on, oh, that was yesterday. Bummer. Hopefully, does anyone have a report out that went to that?
It's an exciting event. We had a lot of people who are coming out continuing the work of the Sustainable Food Business Coalition. So it's been really good to have some different folks from a lot of different organizations and, at different levels of the organizations there too. So a lot of good idea sharing, resource sharing, and starting to think how we can go even further in this area. So really good event and excited for what's coming next in 2026.
Thank you. The Sustainability Forum is kicking off in 2026 on January 27th from 6 to 7. This month will be is it? Oh, they're going to be kind of giving an overview of what will be happening in 2026. So explore exciting new sustainability initiative programs and commitments coming in 2026. So that's again coming up on January 27th. Sustainable Energy Utility Contractor Open House, January 14th, 15th, and 20th. The SEU will be hosting a series of 3 open houses this month for contractors interested in working with the SEU. So these are targeted toward businesses working in solar storage and geothermal HVAC and utility software. There's links for that. For public services, here's a plug for the Citizen Primer program. The webinar training was last weekend, but I think you could probably email the volunteer coordinator. The field training doesn't start until, or that is still upcoming. So I think there's probably some flexibility there if folks are interested. I know a lot of you have done that or are doing that currently as well. The next one is just a shout out to the research being done at the water treatment plant. They have a lot of current research projects going in addition to their day-to-day job of keeping the water clean. So those different topics are listed here for folks that are interested. And then the last one is just because of the chloride work group, particularly. Oh, Steve, did you have a hand raised?
Oh yeah, I just this goes back a little bit. How many households do you guys count as being in Ann Arbor?
How many households?
Yeah, what are the number of households that you're counting in the city?
For which update was that?
Oh, that was the first one about that 500 households have, gotten a
Oh,
energy evaluation.
good question.
The A20 Home Energy Advisor.
Are you asking like how many households in Ann Arbor total, or how many have been as part of this program?
Oh, how many? Well, both, but how many
Well,
total in
yeah.
Ann Arbor?
So
like
I
what
mean,
percentage
in
is
total in Ann
500?
Arbor, there's 50,000, but that includes single family homes and all of the like multifamily units. So I don't immediately have a number on like how many like single family homes, for instance. But yeah, since that update though, at 500, we've had 46 more homes who have participated. So we're up to 546. So still going pretty strong there.
Great, thank you.
And then the last update was just a plug for free de-icing products that can be picked up at these locations. And that is all I had for the staff update.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So next is our second public comment. We allow 3 minutes per speaker. We don't respond in the moment to speakers. We do appreciate you taking the time to comment. Please call 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 988-7619-2402. To raise your hand, press 9. To unmute, press *6. City staff will select callers who have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. Aaron, do we have callers?
We do have a caller. This is Dr. LaCaruso. Caller with the last digits 202. Go ahead. You're still there. I think you have to press *6 to unmute.
Oh, interesting. I had pressed *6. I am not having good luck with the Zoom phone magic tonight. And in fact, I would make a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to make a comment when you just gave the instructions for how to be a speaker. And I would like this off of my time. You did not mention *9, which was the magic code that I didn't know, not having spoken before at one of these city public meetings. So anyway,
apologies for that.
Here I am. I was a charter member of the Environmental Commission, which is the predecessor of this Sustainability Commission. I served for 13 years. I'm a charter member of CARD, and I'm a current member of CARD's Executive Committee. I'm a University of Michigan Emerita Professor of Toxicology and the program in the environment. And I'm speaking tonight for myself, not for a representative of an organization. Discovered in 1986, the Gelman 1,4-dioxane contamination may seem like old news, but we will ignore it at our peril. I thank you for bringing Dr. Chris Sabota to speak at today's meeting. Given that my prepared comments that I made for the beginning of the meeting seem silly now or awkward, I instead wish to respond to some of the comments from tonight's discussion with Eagle representatives. First, I was surprised to hear arguments that current conditions do not warrant concern because they do not present actionable risks as defined by achieving a regulatory hazard level. But in an ideal situation, we should not require a hazardous exposure to exist before action is taken. Rather, we should implement interventions to avoid getting to a hazardous exposure level. Basic public health 101, prevention. Second, on March 5th, 2024, the US EPA published its evaluation of the Gelman site and proposed to add the Gelman site to the Superfund National Priorities List, i.e. as a Superfund site. In the EPA's evaluation, which is called a Hazard Ranking System or HRS documentation record, the EPA assigned the maximum hazard score of 100 for the groundwater exposure pathway for this contamination. Based on the groundwater exposure pathway score alone, the EPA site score of 50 was well above the minimum site score for Superfund listing, which is 28.5. Other exposure pathways were acknowledged, but were not evaluated because of the overwhelming hazard score for the groundwater exposure pathway. In their HRS documentation record, the EPA directly addressed some myths about this contamination. Relevant to earlier discussion tonight, the EPA report concludes, quote, based on the decades-long period of operation, 1963 to 2013, and the documented poor waste handling practices, the release of 1,4-dioxane is attributable to the Gelman facility. There was some discussion about that, whether it could be from personal care products, et cetera. The EPA concluded it's attributable to Gelman. There was also discussion about near-surface detections of 1,4-dioxane, raising concerns for indoor air contamination and exposure.
Okay,
Dr.
10
Robert
seconds.
Bailey and that's not going to work, but I'll try, published an analysis describing an exposure pathway involving contaminated water intrusion into damp or wet basements with subsequent evaporation of 1,4-dioxane into the indoor air. I
Okay,
just want to
we're
point
at
out
time.
that in our, can I please finish the sentence though? I mean, I really had a tough time with your phone system.
I apologize. You can please follow up with an email, and I'm happy to share that with commissioners. Thank
Fine.
you.
Okay.
Okay. There is a caller on the line, but I don't see a raised hand. Okay, that's it for public speaking.
Okay, next, just as a reminder, if you have items for future agenda, please let somebody know. And does anybody else have comments before we adjourn? Is there a motion to adjourn? There's Sarah, is there a second? Second, Anya. Okay, we're done. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.